Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Network. For today's last segment of the day, we'll be looking at the ESPN running back fantasy rankings for the season. Now, honestly, in terms of the running back market, there's not that much talent behind a number one guy who is pretty much obvious, but I do want to see and recognize some of the players that ESPN thinks will help your fantasy team coming into this 24 season, because there's a lot of volatility in the running back market that's represented in some big running back moves concerning players such as Saquon and Derrick Henry, and I think it's reflected in the ranks because picking a running back in fantasy is probably one of the harder positions, because after the obvious number one, there's not much depth around him and a reliable, productive running back that one can say, because there's so much intrigue around the position. But without further ado, let's get into their rankings. So at number one, obviously, they can't overlook Christian McCaffrey. Christian McCaffrey is just one of the most incredible running backs in this league, and he has been, whether as a Panther or as a 49er. Obviously, did not win that Super Bowl trophy that he so coveted last year, but he is very hungry. He's always going to have the production. I think that he's always going to be in that conversation to be one of the first non-QB MVPs in quite some time. I think that just his ability to create in that offense where everyone else is so talented as well is just remarkable to behold. He just adds that element to Kyle Shanahan's already potent attack that teams simply can't rely to cover. But overall, Christian McCaffrey, obviously, he's going to be the number one pick on anyone's draft board. He's going to go number one overall in terms of fantasy. Obviously, there are injury concerns involved with him, but with that high-profile performing element to his game, you can't overlook him at number one. Now, at number two, this is where things get interesting. Now, the player at number two, I think, is a little bit too high in my opinion. Obviously, this is going to be an offense that is going to be heavily scrutinized due to the return of Aaron Rodgers. But Breece Hall is ESPN's number two running back here. I think that this is a very interesting pick at number two, but I can certainly see it because Breece Hall is not necessarily going to be competing with anyone of note in terms of the Jets' running back depth chart. Obviously, they lost Michael Carter, but they added Braylon Allen, but other than that, there's not much depth to that running back room where I can see Breece Hall being challenged week after week to create any kind of running back competition. So I can see why ESPN is so high on him. That being said, he also has injury issues very early on in his career. But I think that the Jets will want to rely on the run game a lot more to take that pressure off of Aaron Rodgers and Garrett Wilson to produce immediately. I think that when we look at the Jets, obviously you want Aaron Rodgers to have a good year, but that all starts with Breece Hall, and I think that Breece Hall will have an excellent year. Maybe not as high as RB2 in my opinion, but he's still a very decent running back that I see having a great performance and year coming up. The running back at number three is another very interesting running back. How about Bijan Robinson at number three? A lot of people say that Bijan Robinson, if given the opportunity, would be in that running back two or one conversation, competing with Christian McCaffrey to be one of, if not the best running back in the league. But I think the problem with Bijan Robinson is if his usage rate will ever go up. Obviously, last year, he learned under Arthur Smith, who did not utilize him to the best of his abilities, mainly because he had Desmond Ridder at quarterback. But now that two quarterbacks are in Kirk Cousins and Michael Penix, how weird is that? I think that Bijan Robinson will be given a much better look at. I think he's too talented of a running back to fall to the wayside in this offense. Obviously, when you look at a team like the Falcons, they have a lot of young stars with untapped potential who haven't reached it quite yet. And Bijan Robinson is the fulcrum for this offense. I think that he can be used in the receiving game. He can open up passing lanes for guys like Drake London and Kyle Pitts. I think that he can be utilized in a myriad number of ways to help this offense. And Kirk Cousins, I think, is one of the better QBs in terms of play action passing, screen action game. So I do expect Bijan's numbers to be inflated, and hopefully by the end of this season, he can be considered to be in the RB2, maybe even RB1 conversation. At number 4 on the list is Jonathan Taylor of Indiana. A very interesting quarterback story. Obviously, when he first came into the league as a rookie, very impressive season, led the league in rushing. But over the years, he has started to decline, and the big question surrounding Jonathan Taylor and Indy in particular is how Jonathan Taylor is going to adapt to the style of play that Anthony Richardson brings. Obviously, Anthony Richardson coming off a shoulder injury, so we don't really know how much passing is going to be integrated into this Indy offense. I do believe that Shane Steichen will want Anthony to get going early on in the season. But Jonathan Taylor is still a very dynamic back. I still think that there are a lot of questions as to his own injury history, as in the top 4 especially we see with them. But overall, I think that Jonathan Taylor is a nice little flyer, a nice little risk to take because of what we saw from him in his rookie season when he was still a very young quarterback coming out of Wisconsin. And he's just a very dynamic player. I think that he's not probably the best receiving running back in the league, but he's certainly one of the most dynamic in open space, creating yards after contact. I just think that Jonathan Taylor is someone who we're heavily underestimating right now, and come fantasy draft time, I think that Jonathan Taylor is someone who I would gladly take because of his abilities to be the guy who creates those yards after contact, might be able to get Anthony Richardson going as well. But moving on to number 5, another highly controversial pick right here in Saquon Barkley. Saquon Barkley is going to be one of those players who is very pivotal to how Philadelphia sets up. I think that obviously all of his 1-yard touchdowns are going to be taken away due to the tush push, so I don't think Saquon will score as many touchdowns. But him and Jonathan Taylor are two guys I can look at and say I'm confident that they're going to be able to create after contact. I think that in open space, Saquon is one of the better receiving running backs in the league. I think that he adds another dynamic component to this Philly offense that was largely missing last year. I think that running back is one of the question marks that Philly needed to fill, and I think that Saquon can fill it to the best of his abilities. So I'm comfortable with him sitting in this RB5 spot for the time being. Coming in at number 6 is another guy who is going to have a lot of question marks coming into the season, but I think is going to be more relied upon than people think, and that is Kyren Williams of the Los Angeles Rams. Now, looking at this Rams offensive attack, it's probably going to be one of the more interesting in the league because we really don't know who's going to be the guy for this Rams attack. Obviously, Cooper Kupp. Obviously, when he came back from injury, very effective. Puka Nacua in his rookie year last year, surprising and shocking everyone in his production. And obviously the steady hand of Matthew Stafford in the pocket. It's just going to be a very versatile Rams offense, as it always is under Sean McVay. And I think that Kyren Williams really carved out a niche for himself in this offense last year. And I think that, while he's still a bit high in my terms, and they're mainly ranking this based off of last year, I still think that Kyren Williams can produce in this Rams offense, and he'll be expected to sometimes because they want that the whole aspect of the Rams offense I really like is they want to keep you off balance. They want to keep it unpredictable. I think that with the addition of a number 2 wide receiver in Puka Nacua. That opens up a lot of space for the run game, and Kyron Williams will heavily benefit from that. But going on to the last 3 on this list, let's go through them really quickly because I'm running out of time quickly here. Jahmyr Gibbs from Detroit. I think that he is a fantastic option. Great rookie year last year. Should have run the ball more in the NFC Championship game, in my opinion. Just a fantastic player for Detroit last year that really opens up their offense. And number 8, an unusual suspect here, in Isaiah Pacheco for the Kansas City Chiefs. I think he's more of a workhorse back, in my opinion. I think that while he's one of the only backs on the Chiefs who can create, I think that ultimately Andy Reid always looks to pass a little more. Obviously, he doesn't want it to be that way, but that's how it is because of the lack of depth in the Kansas City running back room. But overall, I think that Isaiah Pacheco is an interesting player to look at because of his ability to be that workhorse, bell cow kind of back. So yes, I think that he is very deserving of being on this list, but maybe a bit lower. And number 9 is Derrick Henry from Baltimore. Obviously, a change of scenery for him. I think it's going to be kind of awkward, mainly because Baltimore's run game is one of the best in the league. I don't think that they rely on him as much as people think. I think that he's a weird addition, in my opinion, but I still think he's one of the better running backs in the league. Maybe not as high as 9, because there are other running backs that I consider to be above him a little bit, but you know what it is. I think that obviously him being in Baltimore inflates his ranking, so that's that. And rounding out the top 10 is Travis Etienne Jr. of the Jacksonville Jaguars. I think that this is a very interesting pick right here. I think that Travis Etienne Jr. is going to be a player come fantasy time that I think is very pivotal. I think that overall, him and Trevor Lawrence's duo from their Clemson days is a very intriguing subject. And I also think that to alleviate some of the pressure on Travis Etienne Jr. is going to be relied upon. But that is all that is I'm going to talk about for you today. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember, as always, to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It really does make a difference. We also invite you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram for more content and updates. Thank you guys once again for tuning in, and have a wonderful rest of your day. I've been Chris Shepard. This has been the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired.